With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. European leaders sharply criticized Russia after 5 hours of Ukraine peace talks on Tuesday produced no progress. Officials from Estonia, Finland, and Germany said President Vladimir Putin has shown no willingness to negotiate and is instead intensifying battlefield aggression to buy time. They condemned his public remarks, blaming Europe for prolonging the war and suggesting a wider conflict would be Europe's fault. The UK called Putin's statements dangerous and saber-rattling. EU leaders are debating whether to use £140 billion in frozen Russian assets as a loan to support Ukraine's war effort, arguing Russia must face increased costs for aggression. Belgium remains opposed over legal and retaliation concerns. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen insisted Europe wants peace but must increase pressure on Moscow. France has ordered heightened security at Christmas markets due to a very high terrorist threat level. Interior Minister Laura Nunez instructed regional prefects to boost vigilance, deploy police and potentially soldiers for a visible deterrent, and ensure intelligence services are fully mobilized to detect and prevent attacks. France has faced numerous deadly extremist assaults in public spaces, including the 2016 Nice truck attack, while similar attacks have targeted German Christmas markets. The expanded security reflects a trend across Europe where public spaces are increasingly fortified with barriers and patrols. Some German cities have canceled their markets entirely because compliance and protection costs have become too high. The United Kingdom and Norway have agreed to conduct joint naval patrols to protect undersea cables and counter increased Russian submarine activity in the North Atlantic. The pact, announced during Prime Minister Keir Starmer's talks in London with Norwegian leader Jonas Gahr Støre, will deploy at least 13 warships, 8 British and 5 Norwegian frigates purchased under a £10 billion defense deal. The nations will also integrate Norwegian missiles into the Royal Navy. The leaders plan to visit RAF Lossiemouth in Scotland to meet crews monitoring Russian vessels, as the UK reports a 30% rise in Russian naval movements near its waters. The FBI has arrested a 30-year-old Virginia resident, Brian Cole Jr., as a suspect in planting 2 pipe bombs outside Democratic and Republican National Committee headquarters the night before the January 6th Capitol riot. The devices did not detonate, but were discovered the next afternoon near the time Congress met to certify the 2020 election. Neighbors described Cole as reclusive, with law enforcement sources linking him to anarchist ideology. The 5-year investigation previously drew criticism for slow progress and limited transparency.
When you let good cops be cops, this is what happens. I'm eternally grateful to the team behind me, to the leadership at the FBI who made this possible. But I do want to highlight, when I introduced the deputy, he made this case and so many others, including Summer Heat, his priority to come in here and solve it for the American people. And today, I'm proud to stand here before you and say, we solved it. He will have his day in court. The American public and the world will learn even more information through the legal process, as we have committed under this Attorney General. We are the most transparent law enforcement operation in U.S. history, but we are also going to make sure accountability is delivered to its fullest extent, and that happens in the courts of law.
Nigel Farage condemned Labour's decision to delay local elections.
The whole local government reorganisation is a dog's dinner. The public don't understand what's going on. You're asking people in Clacton to vote in local elections year after year after year. You're telling them we're going to get rid of a district council that they know and understand and respect and replace it with a pretty amorphous unitary authority. So, if that is going to go ahead, clearly it is, I don't like it, but clearly it is, you need a senior elected figure.
Order.
And we need a mayor.
We'll be back with another news break at the top of the next hour. This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
There is a problem with medicine, and we can explain what it is by looking back to the discovery of penicillin. Penicillin, it turns out, was not just an accidental finding. Alexander Fleming discovered that mold he found in a culture dish was killing bacteria, but it took over 10 years before a team at Oxford University were able to isolate the active ingredient. They produced small quantities for preclinical and clinical trials, helping prove the compound was safe and could beat infection. However, they couldn't produce it at scale. In 1941, Andrew Jackson Moyer of the US Department of Agriculture, the forerunner to the FDA, suggested changes to the manufacturing process, enabling mass production. It turns out medicines are not invented when someone discovers a new molecular entity. They are the product of key stakeholders working together collaboratively. Until medicine can be manufactured at scale, it may as well not exist. And in 2025, this is a problem. In the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies began outsourcing production. Suddenly the system was significantly less integrated. Someone with a new discovery today will find themselves disconnected from the rest of the development and manufacturing process. Companies that develop medicine are still happy to work with big established pharma companies, but the modern day Flemings are cut out of the system. The result is far fewer new medicines coming to market. We want to fix this by ensuring the pharma industry builds a more integrated supply chain. We also believe that doctors' expertise administering medicine should be included at the beginning of the process. We know that doctors on the front line have insights about how to repurpose medicine. Doctors should be able to report their findings so that the necessary testing can be completed and they can share their results worldwide. Learn more here and help us take medicines back to the future.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome to the Protagonists. We're sort of revisiting a topic we had a little while ago with Palanuroth Taylor, who was the guest host, unavailable for this time. I think he's at an early opener, maybe not. The final report into the death of Dawn Sturgess, a woman poisoned after being exposed to the Russian nerve agent Novichok, has been published. Now, Dawn Sturgess, a mum of three, died in Salisbury District Hospital in July 2018. An inquiry into her death heard 7 weeks of evidence, sometimes behind closed doors for national security reasons. The Dawn Sturgess Inquiry's terms of reference were to investigate the circumstances of her death from Novichok poisoning in Salisbury in 2018 and to uncover the facts surrounding her death, examine the UK government's response and public health advice after the Skripal poisoning, and determine whether mistakes by the government contributed to her death. It also explored potential links between the Sturgess and Skripal poisonings, the source of the Novichok and Russian state, can't leave the Russians out, the Russian state involvement. The inquiry found Russian President Vladimir Putin bears moral responsibility for the poisoning death of Dawn Sturgess. The government has summoned the Russian ambassador to demand a response to the inquiry's findings. The UK has announced new sanctions against very bad Russia, including the entire GRU military intelligence agency, following the release of the report. We talked to our panel about what the inquiry, the findings, omissions, and its broader implications for the UK-Russia relations. Our panel today is Tim Norman, journalist, Mats Nielsen, legal historian and geopolitical analyst, and Oliver Boyd Barrett, Professor Emeritus from the Bowling Green University. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. A different host today, probably the same topic almost. Why did the this take so long? Why did the inquiry take so long? We probably need to hit your microphone. That little button says mic on. What we might do, do we have any? There we are. Yes, we have you. No, we don't. Wait. We might go to while you're trying to fix up. Oliver Boyd Barrett, can you tell us why you think this took so long?
Oh, it took a long time, Mike. This is only 7 years. This is almost 100% better, if my mathematics serves, than it took for the Chilcot inquiry to invasion of Iraq in 2003, in which, of course, Britain was an enthusiastic participant. So I don't think, by those standards, it took a particularly long time. We should ask, or we should be curious about the timing of the release of this. Of this report. It coincides with a major crisis in NATO, US, Russian relations, spearheaded by the corruption scandal in Kiev, the possibility that Ukraine may not only be cut off from the United States and the US support, but even from European support, given that Europe is running out of money. It's promised 80 billion or something to get Ukraine through 2026, but it can't. It's not sure that it can get the money, because the whole idea of continuing European support for Ukraine is hinging more and more day after day on the idea that Europe can lay its greedy little fingers on the frozen assets of Russia. So, in short, Europe and Britain as much as any other member of Europe, is about, and if it is not already being exposed, as one of the greatest fools and knaves in this whole saga of the war with Russia, the proxy war with Russia, using Ukraine as a pretext. The whole of Europe's class, of rotten class and idiotic class of politicians, is about to be exposed. We may even see European politicians shown to be the beneficiaries of pilfered assets sent to Kiev, ostensibly to help Ukraine fight the war with Russia, more likely to just line the pockets of European and Ukrainian elites.
It would also seem it was a foregone conclusion. Would you agree, Tim?
Absolutely. I hope you can hear me now.
We can, just.
Okay. It was a foregone conclusion, and there are no surprises to it. I mean, in fact, the only surprise to my mind in the report is that there was no, if you like, or very little kind of cock up. You expect this sort of cock up rather than conspiracy sort of angle to come out. Going back to, for example, even 9/11, the 9/11 Commission report gave the impression that there was a sort of failure of imagination was the what led to the attacks. People, so there was a sort of responsibility laid, if you like, at the door of the American intelligence establishment back then, and I expected something of that in this case with Dawn Sturgess, that there would be, the stakes were made and lessons to be learned and so forth, and there was a bit of that, but to my, as I say, it's slightly surprised to find it was just a full-on blame Russia exercise. In fact, there's an interesting dimension to it I don't know if Matt's has got any view on this, but they gave it a moral dimension. They said that Putin was somehow morally responsible for the death of Dawn Sturgess. And going back to your original question about why this took so long, why the inquiry took so long to come to this point, it's partly because people need to understand this inquiry came about because of pressure from Dawn Sturgess's family. It wasn't something that, if you like, the UK government entered into willingly out of a desire to be transparent about what had happened in Salisbury in 2018. When Dawn Sturgess died, the Wiltshire coroner, so she died in July 2018, as you said, and the Wiltshire coroner was called David Ridley, opened his inquest in December 2019, and he said that he would not examine the wider aspects of how Dawn came to die. So he wouldn't, for example, he didn't want to examine alleged Russian state responsibility for it, and he said he wouldn't examine the provenance or the origin of the Novichok that apparently killed her. So the Sturgess family rejected that. They objected to it. They brought Michael Mansfield, the great barrister, helped them bring a case in the High Court against the Home Office, against the British government, to say that there had to be a wider scope of inquest to establish why Dawn died, and examine indeed if Russian state culpability existed, and what the provenance of this Novichok was. And so it was because they won this case in the High Court that the British government then they converted the coroner's inquest, which of course has to hear evidence very transparently, into a so-called public inquiry, which ironically, given it was public, in fact hears evidence in secret and allows closed door sessions, which is what happened. And so when I transcribed just a little bit of I think Professor Boyd Barrett, being an expert on sort of media manipulation, how power is disseminated through the media, I'll just read Lord Hughes's opening statement to the as he was about to deliver his report. And he says here, "My role is very similar to that of a coroner who is conducting an inquest into the death of Dawn Sturgess. That's not an accident. The same issues were previously being investigated in an inquest proceedings until it became clear that because of an obvious link to an earlier event in Salisbury in which a former intelligence officer had been poisoned, there would be a need to consider some highly sensitive evidence, and that would be impossible in an inquest. Hence, the inquest was replaced by this public inquiry." So I would ask the panel, does that sound like the government was forced to set up this inquiry, or does it sound like they were willingly entered into it, as it were, as I said, out of a desire to be transparent? It seems to me in fact, you could also say it's simply a lie. They're obscuring the fact that this was forced upon the government, if you will, and that's what led to this inquiry being held.
Matt?
Well, once upon a time I trained as a lawyer and I dealt with preliminary investigations. And with those eyes, I haven't read the entire report in full because I only got to it last night. But I have read enough to be able to conclude that this was not set up to find the truth. There is a lack of direct evidence, obviously. There are no DNA, there are no fingerprints, there's no direct forensic evidence to speak of concerning a good timeline which you legally have to establish. The timelines are very questionable in every aspect. And also there's a clear language of political motivation or lack of a motivation on behalf of the governments. I mean, it suggests that the incident was used to justify anti-Russian policies. And this is more or less the reason. There is nothing about truth in this. And also you have inconsistencies in evidence with the initial misdiagnosis and the blinking situation of Julia Skripal. I think we'll get to that. And finally, there's the closed evidence issue, that the report relies on undisclosed classified material, which will also prevent any independent scrutiny on behalf of anyone interested. But this, we have to remember, the other part of the legal historian, these are part of classical government cover-ups and faulty reports. as mentioned by Oliver, you had the Iraq War dossier, which was the dodgy one, and also before that, I think you had the Hillsbury disaster, where I mean, it took years until the truth came out concerning what happened at Hillsborough. Bloody Sunday also had a tribunal which initially whitewashed the British Army actions. Sorry, which was later overturned by the later inquiry. I think it was called the Savile Inquiry, yes. And then you have the inquiry into the UK's role in the torture and post 9/11 rendition programs, where initially the government denied complicity, and later investigations, of course, revealed systemic UK involvement. And there are also questions still remaining concerning the Litvinenko poisoning back in 2006. So this is just when the government does this to shift blame, protect state actors, mislead the public, and delay accountability. Because time is the daughter to truth. Truth will eventually come out, but by then, maybe 20 years down the line, very few will care. So the delaying of accountability is one of these factors that should not be underestimated as to why the government has created another dodgy inquiry.
Oliver.
Yeah, we mustn't confuse an inquiry of this kind with a criminal trial. We don't have the accused persons in court being properly represented as they would be in a trial. An enormous amount of discretion rests on the shoulders, in this case, of Lord Harris. And there are all manner of ways in which what comes out of these events can be twisted and manipulated. I was struck. I hadn't thought of this, but Tim, you mentioned that it probably wouldn't have come about at all had it not been for the concern of Dawn Sturgess's family, who of course wanted justice, that wanted to find a culprit. And it did remind me of 9/11, the fact that we would not have had even. I'm not wanting to say that the ultimate 9/11 Commission report added up to very much at all, but we wouldn't have had even that, because originally the Bush administration was adamant that they weren't going to go into investigations and inquiries and that kind of thing. But it was only as a result of the pressure from the deaths that had occurred as a result of the events of 9/11 that we even had a commission at all. So I don't think we should put too much faith. The trial. There was a trial in the case of MH17, that is to say, the downing of a Malaysian Airways flight in summer, or was it early fall of 2014, over the war zone of eastern Ukraine. And another interesting, just as I remember MH17, almost right away we had the British press blaming Russia, before anyone had done the remotest bit of investigation at all. So in this instance of the Skripal and the Dawn Sturgess events, within hours or days at least, we have British Prime Minister Theresa May and her then Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson pronouncing that it was almost certainly Russia that did it, And they probably did it by using Novichok, something which no one had any idea about in the general public, what that conceivably might have been. So this was before there was any inquiry whatsoever. It was before Porton Down had issued any kind of statement or conclusive statement. It was before the OPCW arrived in Britain weeks before the OPCW visited England, let alone actually came to some kind of conclusion about what might have been involved. So when you have governments like that pronouncing right at the beginning, just as happened with MH17, you've got government sources saying they know who did it. Time after time after time, we get this. You see, we got it with the chemical weapons attacks in Syria, where the United States tells us pretty much within the news cycle, it was definitely the Assad regime that wickedly used these chemical weapons. We know it for a fact. I mean, but who needs an investigation, for God's sake? This is how it's done, because once government sources have come out with this degree of certainty, how are you ever going to expect that there's going to be an impartial establishing of the truth through government structures?
Yep. I got to ask you just before we get into the other stuff. Does this satisfy Dawn Sturgess's family at all, do you think, Tim?
No. I mean, it represents in some way a defeat for the Sturgess family, because their case was effectively that the British state was in some way culpable for what had happened, and effectively had exposed the people of Salisbury and the surrounding area to a risk that they should have mitigated in some way. That Sergei Skripal was obviously a known retired Russian spy, and the Russian state apparently had precedent, Litvinenko and so forth, and could be expected to carry out some kind of retribution. And so they suggested that there should have been more precautions taken to protect Skripal and, by extension, the people of Salisbury. And really, the inquiry report didn't go that far. It didn't say that reasonable. As I said at the beginning, there should have been precautions taken. For example, Michael Mansfield suggested that Sergei Skripal should have lived in had a gated sort of community, or should have had CCTV. All these things didn't happen. He apparently had no CCTV on his house, as I think we mentioned the last time we talked about it. And the inquiry simply didn't accept any of these criticisms. But Professor Boyd Barrett mentions the OPCW, and in fact, this atrocity in Syria, in Duma, happened only 5 weeks after the Skripal event. So it was part, if you like, of a campaign at the time to suggest that Russia, because Russia was supporting Bashar al-Assad at the time, was seen to, as part, if you like, of a campaign to demonise Russia at that point in time around the issue of chemical weapons, and using the OPCW, which we know at least in part to have been corrupt, because there were whistleblowers that came out from the OPCW around the Duma incident. And as we were talking about last time, 70 bodies were found in a basement of a building in Duma, close to Damascus in Syria. But there was no nerve agent. So they had these whistleblowers made it clear that these people who had apparently been struck dead in a moment by sarin had not in fact been killed by sarin. So there must have been some other cause of death. So you had this strange situation where there'd been a mass casualty event, but there was no nerve agent. And then you compare this to what happened in Salisbury, where you apparently had a nerve agent substantially more deadly than sarin, even several factors more deadly supposedly, and absolutely no deaths. So a very strange sort of contradiction in the narratives there. And I'm afraid to say, Dawn Sturgess's death becomes, if you like, the emotional element of these geopolitical machinations, shall we say.
Just thinking, because Russia has rejected these, quote, baseless and senseless accusations, which we knew they would. We knew they were baseless and senseless accusations. Matt, what implications does this hold for the and probably it's a moot question anyway, but what are the implications for UK-Russia relations? And part two of that, are there any? We probably should turn the microphone on. That's a button says on.
So sorry, rookie mistake.
That's great.
I'll start by answering the second question. There are really no relations to speak of anymore between Russia and the UK, so there's really not any more to destroy. The United Kingdom have been hell-bent on ending any kind of workable relation, even on the most basic of diplomatic levels between the two countries. I'm of course happy, but I'm still surprised that they actually have diplomatic representation in each other's countries. I pray to any chosen God that it will so continue, because that that is really the core necessity, that you keep diplomatic relations open with an embassy in each country. But otherwise, there are really no relations left. And if this report, it doesn't do any good or bad. I mean, Russia has already established the fact that they have lost the UK as a speaking partner in any shape, way, or form. So when you read the report, and for example, there is a lot of claims in the report that kind of, how shall I say, the counter narratives were consistently labeled as implausible in the parts of the report that I have read. The report often uses the words not credible, and they react outright that, for example, I think somewhere they say that there is no evidence of the UK being involved, and of course it's a ludicrous implication that the UK would use military-grade poisoning on its own citizens. Number one, I believe they have in the Porton Downs, previously in the Porton Downs area in relation to its military, they tested it. And secondly, it doesn't have to have been a military-grade nerve agent. They were working on the assumption that it was, which still I would say is unproven, because if it actually was Novichok, there would have been a whole lot more casualties. But once again, this is one of those things that is just written off as not plausible. But going back to your question, it doesn't affect relations, because today there are no relations.
Not the actual quote from the report that you mentioned, Mats. He says,
good.
The quote that I think you're referring to, he says, "I am sure there was no staging of the Salisbury event by the UK authorities designed to blame Russia." That's his statement in the report.
Yep, that's the one.
Oliver.
I haven't had a chance to read the bulk of the report, and maybe Tim or Mats can answer this too, which is, it seems quite a reasonable supposition to me that, and this is hinted at, I think, by Tim just now, that the people who left this perfume bottle, if indeed this is true, after the city had been so carefully searched previously, were they the supposed Russian agents on their way home, or was this a plant? Given that so much fuss was made about Novichok and about the supposed seriousness of this crime, and etc., and so on, and yet no one actually died, no one actually died until Dawn Sturgess. Was it that the British just really needed some kind of victim in the hope that they could close this case satisfactorily negative towards Russia? So I come back to the basic question. If we were, foolishly of course, if we were to regard these kind of inquiries as sort of scientific, we would expect, wouldn't we, that every plausible hypothesis will be looked at and explored. I mean, it's not as, of course, originally Porton Down, we had statements about how oh, only Russia could have used Novichok. Russia was the only known country in the whole world that had invented this stuff or used it, and all this turned out not just to be totally untrue. There were lots of other countries that had experimented with Novichok or Novichok type agents, but of course, Porton Down itself, as we found out eventually, had engaged in a lot of experimentation with Novichok. And here we are talking about a murder that's actually created right next door to Porton Down. What a strange coincidence that is. So,
Yes.
yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Can I ask you, Tim, what questions doesn't it answer?
Doesn't it answer? You mean what questions does it leave open?
Yeah, yeah, the gate
Well,
is
there's a
open.
whole
The
host.
Skripalgate
There's a
is
whole
called.
host of questions. In fact, the Sturgess family reported on the BBC yesterday is saying we still have questions, and that was the headline that was made. And I mean, I'm very glad that Professor Boyd Barrett mentioned the bottle, because this bottle, of course, is the one element, if you like, the one forensic piece of evidence that we have, and it relates to the narrative of Dawn Sturgess's boyfriend at the time. So he was alcoholic, this is freely admitted, and a heroin addict, and indeed a petty criminal. He'd been convicted of drug dealing in the past. And this is another little detail that the inquiry didn't mention. His previous girlfriend had actually died in his flat, in his house, of a heroin overdose while he was there, and he knew she had taken an overdose. And he put her to bed. This is revealed in documents released to the inquiry, where she died. So, if you like, this is the kind of second time that his girlfriend has died in his presence for some reason. So, this narrative that we've been asked to accept, and which the inquiry completely accepts, is that he found this bottle in a bin. He was bin dipping, looking for items of interest, and he found the bottle. It was fully packaged. It was sealed. It was actually in two pieces, sealed in a box as if new. Brought it home to Dawn. She then apparently sprayed this substance. They opened the bottle. He spilled some of the substance on himself. Well, I shouldn't laugh, but it's so bizarre. While opening the bottle, he spilled some of this liquid on his hands. He washed his hands, put the cap on the bottle, and she apparently sprayed herself. And within 15 minutes, she was fixed. The point is, this is purely his testimony. We have no evidence this happened except for his testimony. That it's absolutely without any other corroboration whatsoever. And he wasn't called to give testimony to the inquiry in any way. He was said to be too ill. He said he had memory issues. So the inquiry was reduced to sort of looking at 6-year-old transcripts of police interviews that he gave at the time, and some interviews that he gave to the ITV 6 years previously. But they didn't interview the sole witness to this event, to Dawn's death. And had they done so, they would have, I feel quite certain, shown inadvertently from their point of view that this key witness was a terribly unreliable witness. He was alcoholic. He couldn't have memory, didn't have any memory of finding the bottle. So, as I say, the British the establishment have taken this testimony at face value and used it as the foundation of this report, when it really doesn't really pass the sniff test, as I'm sure Max would agree.
Yeah, Mats, do you agree?
I agree. I do, and because it's a matter of the forensic consistency, and of course the reliability of any witness. Like Oliver said, this wasn't his day in court, but it's still a matter of trying to find out the truth behind a presented scenario. In this case, the UK government scenario. Does it hold up? But with the forensics inconsistencies and the closed evidence, we come down to a lot of logical implausibilities. And I think the report, now, I haven't put this to the count, but I think I should later. There are a lot of phrases in the report which I saw when I was skimming through it, that says it is not plausible. There is no credible scenario. It would have been, or it would be astonishingly reckless. It would be reckless by Salisbury police or such and such to do X. Now, we being advised to what governments do, governments are often astonishingly reckless. But for some reason, when it comes to the Skripals, it's just not there. You can't fathom the fact that someone within the government had been reckless in dealing with this. So the alternative explanations are definitely not thoroughly investigated. And the Sturgess family, when they say we need more answers, we lack answers, I think they sum it up quite well. The report presents itself as very evidence-based, and of course they want it conclusive. But labeling every counter-narrative as implausible without giving a full transparency kind of mirrors, like I said before, the historical state-led inquiries, which more than often hide inconvenient questions and put them to the sidelines instead of resolving them, because resolving them would probably mean that more questions could be asked, and you wouldn't want that, would you? Because then the truth might come out, and the truth, we don't like the truth. If we're in Whitehall, truth is a naughty word.
It is, and it's not. I mean, Oliver, I'm just thinking, what about the wider implications for Ukraine?
Yeah, I think it starts in connection with Ukraine, actually, but also in connection with Syria. If we bear in mind when this actually occurred in 2018. By this time, much to NATO's astonishment and concern, Russia is on the world stage is beginning to look very sensible and very moderate and very intelligent in its handling of international crises. So we saw Russia work with, unfortunately, as it turns out, Russia work with Merkel and other players with respect to the Minsk agreements that were going to resolve the Ukraine crisis. And in Syria, it was Russia's initiative with the United States. It brokered an agreement with the United States to destroy Syria's stocks of chemical weapons. And that indeed occurred to the full satisfaction of the OPCW. Britain, on the contrary, was looking increasingly foolish in Syria. It had supported the White Helmets. It had supported various jihadist groups. It was fundamental, really, in the struggle against the Assad government, but it was all beginning to fall apart. It wasn't working. It did look as though Assad with Russia, because of Russia's very cautious but very effective intervention, not just over the matter of chemical weapons, but in the matter of supporting the Assad government against the Western-backed and UAE and Saudi-backed and Qatari-backed jihadists of various stripes. So, of course, we know it is astonishing, actually, the history of Russophobia, particularly with respect to Britain and Britain's attitude to Russia. It truly does go back a couple of hundred years. We've got John Stuart Mills in 1835 talking about how the British are constantly invoking the Russian demon in order to get more money for British defense. And because you go back further still, and you find Napoleon invading, this is in 1812, and Napoleon invading Russia because he wants to break up the he wants to bring down the United Kingdom's unwillingness to join this the crusade against so it goes on and it's constantly invoked. We've lived through the Cold War. We've lived through Britain's support for the White Russians at the end of the revolution following 1916. We've lived through Britain's refusal to talk to Stalin when Stalin wanted to ally with Britain and against Germany. But no, Britain wasn't going to have any of that because, so far as Britain was concerned, the real enemy, of course, was communism. And so we get even within the fact 2 months before the beginning of World War II, there's a conference that is being held again to discuss the possibility of an alliance between Russia and Britain and other allies. And the instructions from Britain to their negotiators at the conference is go very, very slowly. It's pathetic. And then, because we go through the Cold War, and then as soon as you think, it's over now, now we can all live together and we can happily travel to one another's countries and that kind of thing. Britain, of course, with the United States, turns around and says, well, that business about NATO not moving further eastwards, we're not going to bother about that. And let's have Georgia and Ukraine join NATO. Putin, he puts up with a lot. And even as late as December 2021 into January 2022, he's talking to the Americans. He's trying to follow up on a promise by Biden that Biden would look again at this issue of planting intermediate nuclear weapons in not Poland and Romania, where they already are, but in Ukraine. And Biden casually has said to Putin, okay, well, we don't need these weapons in Ukraine. And that is considered a very important advance towards peace by the Russians. But then in January, they're not getting any further word about this from Washington. And then finally, there's a conversation with Blinken, and Blinken says, what? We never heard about that. And the whole thing. So immediately the Russians realize that once again, the United States and the Western allies are not playing straight on this. The invasion, the invasion of Ukraine, of the Donbass, occurs.
Yeah, Tim, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, as we were saying last time, the Skripal case was certainly, if you like, manufacturing consent, preparing the ground, you might say, in the British public for these wider geopolitical events, which, as Professor Boyd Barrett says, have actually got centuries of history behind them. I mean, jingoism, this phrase jingoism, I think dates back to the first Crimean War, which is a very manufactured and sort of trumped up event. Apparently, I think the British were expected to believe that Russia was about to invade India, and that was how we were sort of whipped up into a very false war. I mean, indeed, as Assange has said, all wars are started by lies, so wars can be prevented by the truth. And just to mention another great Australian, since we're here, John Helmer is really been the leading authority on the Skripal case, among many other things. And I'm greatly looking forward to what his reporting will be actually on this Dawn Sturgess event. He's written 2 books about the Skripal Novichok affair and has really been on the issue right from the beginning. So it'll be very interesting to see what he has to say about the Dawn Sturgess inquiry and so forth. Just want to quickly bring something sort of to Professor Boyd Barrett's attention as a sort of a scholar of media power. And this is a little excerpt from the Times reporting yesterday about the Dawn Sturgess, and it's just a background at the Times. It's Stephen Swinford, who's the lead political correspondent for the London Times, and he said that he reported the nerve agent attack in 2018, which left one person dead. That's obviously Dawn Sturgess, several severely ill, and more than 80 in hospital, was described as preventable. So what Stephen Swinford doesn't tell you in that little passage is that the 80 people who reported to hospital were there because they were worried. They were what the inquiry called the worried well. Not one of those 80 people had actually been affected by the poison. So this is a live omission. It's quite extraordinary live omission to just drop casually into a mainstream report in order to amplify fear.
I'm appalled that legacy media would do such a thing. I mean, it's always the first, isn't there, Oliver? Matt?
It's, I mean, lies by omission is basically what I see, and I think we all here see every day. If you have enough information, as we do, since we eat news, we live by reading news, that's one of our interests, we know what's been omitted. But the majority of our citizens around us don't. So lies by omission is a very, it's one of the best ways for legacy media to work. And just to finish off the pattern on the report that we had, the report follows one of these patterns. That is it on the subject of omission. The report states some official fact. For example, there is no CCTV. And then the report avoids to investigate that anomaly, and it doesn't treat them as a puzzle to be solved. It just leaves it out. And then it uses other circumstantial evidence to bridge that gap by relying on closed evidence. And then it labels anyone like us who has questions as skepticists, and we're being irrational. They are just in the report dismissing any alternative narratives as, and then I quote, being ludicrous. And it just avoids explaining these gaps. And this, I would say, is the pattern of the report as far as I have been able to conclude so far. I will, of course, continue reading it. But in essence, the report asks the British public mainly to accept an unprecedented event based on a chain of evidence that has many missing links. And of course, sadly, I believe that the UK public will not care enough, but they will more than likely just accept it and accept the fact that Russia is morally responsible. And then the propaganda war continues.
Tim, you deal with the public because you're in the media in the UK. Have they bought this tripe at the moment, or have they they're going, yes, bad Russians all got gold teeth or something like that? I mean Goldfinger, that will happen soon. But truly, have they actually bought? And surely anybody with an ounce of brains can see that this has got many great holes in it.
I think Matt's made a great analogy when we were talking last time. It's a bit like talking to someone who's got a religious belief, and how much reason you apply to the fact, or lay out the facts. There's always going to be a sort of a group of people who are impervious to reason because it's an item of faith to them that Russia's the bad guy. Having said that, when you look at the comment section of the mainstream media, so I'm thinking of the Independent, and although I'm not a fan, the Daily Mail is interesting because it has an open comment section and the public can make their comments freely. You don't have to register. You can just be an anonymous commentator. And on those forums, you see a great deal of scepticism actually from the British public about what they're being told, and making comments, as we've done here. Oh, what a coincidence that Porton Down is just 8 miles up the road. And the deadliest nerve agent ever known to man that didn't kill anyone until sort of 4 months later, and sort of fairly sarcastic comments of that nature are quite common. So yes, I mean there are people, and clearly the political media elite wants us to sort of accept this really rather implausible, and it would be laughable were it not for the fact that it involved the death of Dawn Sturgess. John Helmer compared this to Operation Mincemeat. In fact, he suggested that her death was tragic, but not actually related to Novichok, and was used to bolster the narrative in the same way as this event during the Second World War, where a body was dressed up as a British officer and used to deceive the Germans. So he's created that analogy. That's not mine. But yes, I mean, there is skepticism out there, and obviously those people who are skeptical are being smeared as conspiracy theorists and so forth. But we can only hope that this sort of penetrates further into the mainstream as we're doing now, trying to push this forward into the narrative, and let's hope some kind of reason does sort of surface among the Western public in general about Russia and its intentions. This is not a power that's intent on invading the whole of Western Europe, which is what we're being asked to believe is quite preposterous. And I think any rational observer would say this simply isn't the case.
Oliver, shows you that government-fed media propaganda, like diarrhea. I don't mean to be rude, but it is, and they still believe it. Tell me this: any hope for mankind? Because truly, this is truly a script from a James Bond movie that wasn't accepted.
Yeah, I think what for me is most staggering about this is the continuity of very, very long-term, long-range geopolitical struggles. I have to apologize. I garbled my account of Napoleon's invasion in 1812 of Russia. The reason for that was to actually bring pressure on Russia to join along with everybody else against the continental or with the continental blockading of the United Kingdom. But if we can just skip forward by a couple of 100 years or so, going back to 2018, these games require very long preparation and thinking. And 2018 was just, we're just talking about a few months away from the report in early 2019, extending Russia by the RAND Corporation, which is the report that spells out pretty much chapter and verse as to what the plan is to reduce Russia, to fragment Russia, to make it vulnerable, therefore, to capture by Western corporate interests, which is the wet dream that Britain, too, has been chasing for, as I say, the last couple of 100 years, not just Britain. And then within a day or so of the publication of Extending Russia by the RAND Corporation, we have the coming to power in Ukraine of none other than Zelensky, who his main promise to the Ukrainian people was to bring about peace in its relations with Russia. And then within a few weeks, he was talking about how Ukraine really needs nuclear weapons for protection against Russia. And so I strongly suspect, and maybe someone somewhere has actually proven this by now, that Zelensky he's not a Ukrainian. He's a Western agent, in effect. I don't care, where he was born, what language he speaks. I think if you look at what he does, up until now, at least, he's been working for the West to implement a plan, which I'm sure, because we can look at the RAND report, extending Russia, that tells us, well, this has been in planning for at least the previous 3 years, 2019 to 2022, and Zelensky is the tool. He's inserted into power just a few months after this business of the Skripal. Britain is all about propaganda. It's about the only thing that Britain really does quite well anymore. And there was a report in the early 2000s from something called the British Institute of Statecraft, something like that, some kind of front organization for the British Foreign Office that made the case why Britain needed to escalate its anti-Russian propaganda and to do it much more effectively and successfully. And we had reports from the British military saying that the military needs to give much more importance to the role of mind control, in other words, in its future conflicts. So Skripal is just one little drop in an ocean of propagandizing by the British, as we've seen for a couple of hundred years. And it's extremely dangerous. It's reckless. It's driven by people who actually, they don't have a military capability anymore. They've got some nuclear weapons, but those are dependent on this, the permission of the United States. And even now, along with Germany, particularly Merz, and also with Macron, beating the drums for war. They may not have the capability right now, but they have a belief system that tells them that they are righteous. It's a stupid belief system. It's totally ahistorical, and it's totally social class based. It's an illusion. I think they actually do believe it, and I think they also believe that anything can be done if you know how to raise the money to do it. And frankly, it's a pretty good bet that one way or another, there are always ways you can raise money. If you can promise those who are going to lend it to you that they're going to get a good return on it. And we're on the verge of nuclear war, I am afraid. I do believe this. I'm not simply saying it.
I just want to ask, first of all, Mats, because I read one of your tweets just recently where you mentioned that Sweden were about to or had taken a bunch of missiles, and you said their intentions is to fire them at Russia. Can you just tell me a little more about that, and just to add to Oliver's view that we are heading, not inching, but leaping great steps towards a nuclear war?
Yes, well, the fact was Sweden has procured medium to long-range missiles, and that is done since we are, as a part of NATO, we have become a target because we are within the NATO planning community a forward staging area to support the Baltics and to support Finland in case of a very implausible Russian conventional military attack on those nations. So therefore Sweden said we need missiles to be able to counter-strike Russia when our cities that are being stocked with NATO equipment have been obliterated. So it's not it's just one of those things that happen once you join NATO. As for the nuclear war, I've always said, and I maintain this point of view, I am not that overly afraid of a nuclear war for one reason and one reason alone. A nuclear war is extremely bad for business. I mean, once you go nuclear, those profit margins, they just disappear. Yes, the whole of civilization disappears, admittedly, but also the ability to make a quarterly profit and buy a new Lamborghini for the money you've made with your stocks in Raytheon or Boeing avionics are gone too. So there is nothing, you can't spend your profits on anything if you go nuclear. So I think the secret elites and the powers that be, if we speak about them in that term, want to stay just below that nuclear threshold. However, this is a hell of a black swan to be playing with, because once the tipping point, you can't go back from that button push. So it's an immensely dangerous game. But I still think that everyone wants to avoid it because it's not profitable.
it's not good for your health and for business. And it's interesting too. We're talking to a ex-military person the other day, and they were saying that politicians that make one big mistake when it comes to war. They think they can control the war. War has a mind of its own. It'll go wherever it wants to go. Tim, I just see that the UK is always preparing for a stoush with Russia, and with your illegal immigrants coming in by boat, it adds to the British Navy and it's to its resources. What's your feelings? Do you think, because Starmer's, he's chewing at the bit. He really wants to show everybody what they're made of. And I presume if he does that, he'll be also leading from the front. Thoughts?
I don't imagine he'll be leading from the front. Yes, I mean, he is part of this group that Professor Boyd Barrett, Macron, all these Western European leaders appear to be gung-ho, if you like to say it. But just going back to something that Matt's just referred to, I think Smedley Butler, the great American general, said, "All wars are bankers' wars." They're a way of making money, huge profits to be made from war. And you do get the feeling that the whole Western economy, including the British economy, is sort of being put on a war footing, if you like, because we want to generate some kind of industry and create profit out of weapons manufacturing, which appears to be the only sort of form of manufacturing base we pretty much have left in this country and in most of Western Europe. We've been so effectively deindustrialized. So that, I mean, I do hope that Matt is correct, and I think he is broadly correct in his analysis that if we go nuclear, then indeed there's no markets left to sell these weapons to, because we're all returned to piles of radioactive ash. But the problem, of course, is that when you make these weapons, when you build up armies and arsenals, they have a tendency to be used. You can't, even Ukraine, if you like, has become a dumping ground for all this sort of out of date military technology that was manufactured in Western economies in America, and it has ended up being used in a terrible conflict, which has cost millions of lives. So yes, that's all I've got to say. Profit motive is, in some aspects, it's something we can rely on to protect us, perhaps, but it's also a very, very dangerous motive when it's applied to the military-industrial complexes, of course, it's called.
Well, we also we have a machine called a Bushmaster, which is an armoured personnel carrier in Australia. We sent a whole bunch over to Ukraine, and I think most of them didn't work. So, but it is a dumping ground. And Oliver, just one final one for you, because if you can make this brief and just to not froth at the mouth, you have the catalyst for peace in the world. You have President Trump.
Mercurial is a word that people like to use of him. I prefer something a bit stronger in the direction of a total lunatic. But of course, uncertainty is a grave instigator of feelings of anxiety and worry. So, in addition to the problems that we face arising from realpolitik, real geopolitical tensions that are coming to the surface in this era, in all manner of ways that are distinguishing our generation from many that have gone before. We also have this problem of personality, and it just makes it much worse. I actually believe that Putin really would have preferred Biden, not because he liked that crew who were as hostile to Russia, even more hostile to Russia, perhaps, than is Trump. But at least with Biden, they kind of knew where they stood. With Trump, I mean, like right now, once again, is a continuing cycle. Right now, we're at the point of the cycle where everyone is thinking, oh, maybe peace is possible. Look, Russia and the United States are talking to one another. Oh, that's great. When can we light the fireworks? But you don't know. Past evidence suggests that by Monday, Trump will have decided that Zelensky actually is Winston Churchill reborn, and possibly the son of Jesus Christ. We don't know. It makes it very, very difficult to operate in this environment.
It does indeed. Gentlemen, we have to wind this up now. I want to thank Tim Norman, journalist, Mats Nielsen, legal historian and geopolitical analyst, and of course, Oliver Boyd Barrett, Professor Emeritus at the Bowling Green University in Ohio. Thank you very much for your time. I've enjoyed it immensely. This has been The Protagonists, and this is The World Today.